Welcome to For the Record. I'm Will Keneally. We first go to a tumultuous week on Capitol Hill, where a sitting House Speaker was fired from their leadership role for the first time in history. Now, that left a power vacuum without a clear leader emerging among the Republicans who control the House. But later in the week, two possible candidates floated their names, Steve Scalise of Louisiana and Jim Jordan of Ohio.
This is really important that we get this right.
My politics are entirely consistent with where conservatives and Republicans are across the country.
Joining us now to help break down how all of that shaped up is Lawrence Andrea, D.C. correspondent for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. And hey, Lawrence, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So I know this was a historic vote earlier in the week, but I'm also kind of curious about just how much of a shock it was. Did we hear any threats to McCarthy's speakership during that budget debate last week?
Yeah, well, this really goes back to January and McCarthy's 15-ballot effort to become speaker. He had to make promises to that far-right faction of his conference to do things like keep spending levels low, pass individual appropriations bills instead of one big package, give lawmakers a certain number of hours to review bills, and notably allow any single member to raise a motion to vacate. But earlier this summer, McCarthy cut a deal with Democrats to suspend the debt ceiling when the country was on the brink of default, which that faction took issue with. And then just last weekend, he needed Democrats to pass a stopgap spending bill to keep the government open. And that measure didn't have some of those deep spending cuts Republicans were looking for. And some in that faction, led by Matt Gaetz of Florida, saw that as the last straw.
We've seen, especially in Wisconsin here, a little bit of a split vote. Some Republicans voting against that budget deal, but backed McCarthy's speakership vote earlier in the week. What have we been hearing from them kind of as all this has been playing out?
Yeah, well, Tom Tiffany and Scott Fitzgerald voted against the continuing resolution to keep the government open last weekend, but all six Wisconsin's House Republicans backed McCarthy on Tuesday. Fitzgerald, after the vote, sort of pointed to what he saw as successes during McCarthy's 9 months in office, or as speaker, I should say, like some border security legislation that passed the House. Tiffany said similar things, but said the House should get back to passing these 12 appropriations bills with that temporary funding patch expiring in mid-November. But I think, who members of Wisconsin's delegation end up supporting to be the speaker could tell us a bit more about what direction they want to take this Congress.
And we've already seen a couple of names starting to float, Steve Scalise, Jim Jordan. Do you know yet kind of what of a timeline we're looking at to replace the House Speaker, or is that still kind of up in the air?
It's pretty up in the air right now, but obviously after the vote to oust McCarthy, the House members sort of went home to their districts for the week. I think they'll be back on Capitol Hill on Tuesday, and they plan to start this process of electing a new speaker Wednesday, but it's not sort of clear how long that will take.
Lawrence Andrea with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, based out of D.C., thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now, among Wisconsin Republicans, U.S. Representative Scott Fitzgerald and U.S. Senator Ron Johnson both say that they are behind Jim Jordan for Speaker. And a quick note that we reached out to multiple Wisconsin Republicans for an interview this week, but they were not available. But we did want to check the temperature of Washington with a member of Wisconsin's congressional delegation, Congressman Mark Pocan. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Sure.
So I know you're back in district today, but just a general sense of what's the demeanor like on Capitol Hill right now?
Well, we thought it was chaotic when we were trying to just get a continuing resolution passed. Should have been something that was super simple. Now you take that chaos and it's exponential. The Republicans are in disarray. They have a civil war going on, hence kicking out a speaker. And now we're just waiting for them to select one because we can't vote on anything on the floor until they have a speaker. So chaos might even be a compliment to what's going on.
And I want to pick apart a little bit. Why did the Democrats join that effort to remove McCarthy? It seems like it could be a case where the devil that you know is better than the devil that you don't.
Well, Kevin McCarthy's been governing like Matt Gaetz anyway. He's been appealing to that extreme element for 9 months. He's ignored Democrats, said he didn't want our votes. In fact, even up to this vote, said he didn't want our votes. We replied. Honestly, I think, he's probably one of the weakest and most untrustworthy speakers that we've had that I can think of through my time, whether it be the legislature or in Congress. And because of it, he just didn't have the trust. I mean, on Saturday alone, he introduced the continuing resolution, gave us 15 minutes to read a 71-page document. The day before, he was going to cut spending by 30%. And now we're supposed to trust him. And we had to fight to get extra time through dilatory tactics on the floor. We asked for 90 minutes. He wouldn't even give us that. So we got zero respect. We got extreme governing. We got everything that you'd expect to come from Matt Gaetz out of having Kevin McCarthy as speaker. I don't know how that changes unless that caucus decides to change, but there is absolutely zero incentive for us to continue the chaos that's going on.
And so where does that leave the House now with that power vacuum?
Well, the Republicans got to figure out a speaker, and I think that's their job. They've told us many times they're not going to want Democratic votes. It's an agreement they made early this session. I think a dumb one. I think the American people expects us to get things done. That means to compromise. It's pretty much things that you learn how to do in 4th grade. But right now, the behavior is a little more like 1st or 2nd grade among the Republicans in their civil war. So unfortunately, this is clicking away time that we need as we get closer to when that end of the time we gave to keep funding government is 6 weeks. If we're not getting appropriation bills done, then we're no further than we were before the continuing resolution.
And I was going to ask you, too, how close are we, or do you have a sense of whether we will meet that 45-day deadline to pass either a budget or another CR?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is it's so chaotic. I have no idea. I don't understand how the current Republican majority thinks. Clearly he governed to just about everything Matt Gaetz wanted, and yet that wasn't enough. And yet, as Democrats, we're looking at this and seeing how chaotic it is. Kevin McCarthy negotiated an agreement not to have a CR, that we would have been done by September 30th, back when we had the debt ceiling limit lifted. And then he broke his word 2 weeks later. That's one of the reasons why we couldn't support him. He's untrustworthy. But, really, the chaos there is so entrenched. I don't know what to expect, and I can just hope for the best.
Congressman Mark Pocan, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.